There's a moment just before a story begins where everything is still light, before choices, before consequences, before the parts of ourselves we don't always recognize start to surface. This is Too Light, Too Dark, episode 29, a space for the stories that don't sit comfortably in one place, the ones that live in the in-between where beauty and brutality, they can exist side by side and sometimes neither one wins. Today I'm joined by an author, a storyteller, who doesn't shy away from the emotional weight of her characters, but leans into it fully. Best known for her work, The Legacy of Four Trilogy, I'm handing over flowers of introduction to J.F. Monroe.
Thank you so much for having me. That was an absolute amazing introduction, and I very much appreciate it.
So to kick us off, before the books, before the titles, who were you when storytelling was still just yours, and what did it give you that nothing else did?
A great question. I probably started writing stories just for me, just for fun. When I got to high school, I joined the drama club very quickly. I was much more behind the scenes, and I really enjoyed a lot of writing a lot of screenplays, which definitely, as we get into this conversation and we talk more about the book, you'll see I will definitely talk about how screenplays definitely made their way into my book, the writing at least aspect. Um, and it was for fun. I really enjoyed it. It was an outlet for me. I'm not a wordsmith by nature. Like if I have to stand in front of a crowd, I'll make you laugh a couple of times, hopefully, but I'm not like that, you know, I can dish out words just like that. I'm much better with pen and paper or in front of a laptop, and then I can give you something beautiful if you just let me like kind of put my mind to it. Um, when I got to college, I got a bachelor's degree in creative writing with a minor in classics, because I saw the trend. I wasn't good at math and science. And so why not lead into reading and writing? That was just going for me really well. And when I got out of college, I hid behind an anonymous username and just wrote a bunch of fan fiction. So like I would take other people's stories, whether it's TV shows or movies or books, and I would just like incorporate my characters into it. I didn't have to build worlds. I could just kind of feed into others and build characters off of that. And that's kind of how I sedated the urge to kind of create narratives and write and do things. And it was anonymous, so there was no risk or I didn't have to be vulnerable at that time and it was safe, but it still provided that outlet for me to kind of express my emotions the way I wanted to express them.
And just thinking about your origin story, where is it? Yeah, you grew up.
I grew up in New York, specifically in the Bronx for most of my life. I'm now up here in Westchester, so I traded in people for deer. And it's been quite amazing. I do love the quiet at my age. I think I just have a certain appreciation for it. But yeah, I grew up in the city my entire life, New York City, and so as you can imagine, it's very loud and boisterous and always on. And so when I have those moments of just kind of having that quiet, I definitely lean into it a little bit more until I moved up here.
Yeah, it's an amazing city. I spent some time in there in the early noughties, if you remember them. That loudness is, and I live in London right now as well, and it's really interesting that when you disappear into the sticks or outside that city, the reduction in volume is very, very noticeable and obviously affects your equilibrium, your creativity, how you think. I suppose it gives you maybe some clear space to do some further reflection. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When things get a little bit quiet, not too quiet, but quieter than the city that I was used to, it does allow for you to have kind of like a second with your thoughts and you can kind of collect yourself and map things out a little easier than when you're in the city and it's really loud and your brain is going a mile a minute and you can only think in like stutters.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
So every story for me, it has it's got a heartbeat, it's got a beginning. What was a moment, an image, a feeling that refused to leave you alone, and I suppose was the birthplace of what would become your trilogy?
It was It was a line in a book that I completely misinterpreted. That's where my story was born. I was on maternity leave, so it was about 7 years ago. My son is 7 right now, and I was bedridden. I couldn't do a lot, And so I started to binge watch TV shows and movies. And I watched a particular TV show that portrayed the Four Horsemen in a way that I just wasn't used to seeing. Now, mind you, the Four Horsemen at that time, I had not seen in any real type of media. And so the intrigue was immediate when I saw them. They were kind of portrayed in human vessels, kind of like in my book. And so I went to their origin, which was the book of Revelation, where they were first written about, expecting, because I was not knowledgeable about this at the time, for it to have like pages upon pages of these horsemen. That was not the case. It had a couple of lines about the horsemen, and then it moved on to, other things. But in those lines, there was one that I read. And remember, I'm a classics minor. So I grew up in like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all of that great stuff. And the line was, paraphrasing, so I apologize, but like I looked and there before me was the pale horse and its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. And so my classics like alarms went off, and I was like, what is the Greek god of the underworld, Hades, doing in Christian mythology? This is insane. And so I looked it up further and I realized that I had misinterpreted it. They did not refer to the Greek god Hades, they were referring to just like the embodiment of the underworld itself. But that line stood with me so much that it would not leave me alone, and so I started from there branching out into like, "Oh, well, what if this happened?" And so, like, a plot line would form, and I was like, "And what if I threw this person into it?" And a character would appear, and so from that line birthed this trilogy.
Wow, and that's a meaty topic for something to occur to you in the middle of maternity leave, and I suppose you've got that space to do that sort of thinking in amongst raising a little one all at the same time. And I think I shared with you before the podcast started where I first heard about the four horsemen and that everything is bleak, we're all going to die, and then nothing's going to happen at the end of that. The atheist thinkers, some of them impressive orators though, and polemicists at the same time. But the first time that I'd heard of this fully was within the lens of Carl Jung and within symbolism and mythology and the esoteric sense and spirituality, and how the four horsemen were separated, I think, in four colors. I'm going to give this my best shot. As you got the white horse, you've got the red horse, then you've got the black horse, I think, which represents food, famine,
You got
and
it.
then you've
Yep.
got obviously death, the pale
Yeah.
horse. How does that play into your stories at all during your trilogy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually on the cover of the first book. The horses are those exact colors. I really did try to respect the Christian mythos, the way I could. So, no, they were not bringing about they could bring about the apocalypse, but in my trilogy, they were meant as guardians, right? They're called the legendary guardians. They're meant to protect first. And then if that's not the case, then they might have to ride, in which, it brings about the end of the world. But they are meant as guardians. I love to twist things on their heads. And so when I was deep diving into the research, I did run across like the atheist views and their perspectives. I also ran across like, sometimes the four horsemen stand for renewal, right? So like let's look at it in a positive way. Yeah, the earth is restarting, but it's gonna, come alive again, and then new life will form on it. And we should just look at it as a positive. So I really respect all of those perspectives. It helped me figure out like, okay, I don't want the four horsemen in my story to be bad. They're going to be my main characters. I want them to be kind of like a force for good, or almost like a neutrality, if you will. But the horses was a really fun theme just because I got to play around with them a little bit, and I kept them very much the same. You have the red horse, the black horse, the white horse, and then of course the pale horse. I will be completely transparent. I did change up two of the names of the horsemen. So you have death, you have war, famine. You mentioned I changed that to pestilence, and I
Mm.
did that because of what we were going through over here, like with like because remember this spans over 7 years, and so like with the pandemic that we went through, I was just like pestilence has a better vibe to it than famine does. But they both represent the same thing, so I can make it work. And then the other horseman was conquest, and I struggled with how to write that horseman, and so I made that horseman strife. instead. I just called them strife because I thought that strife was a better embodiment of what I could put on the paper, versus conquest, that I could have done it, but it would have just been a little bit more challenging for me to portray.
And yeah, I was thinking before I met you, and I was thinking about, well, the sort of the psychology journey
Yeah.
through the myth of the four horsemen, and I was thinking about the sort of ambition, the ego, or the death of ego, sometimes at the bottom, kind of illusion of control, sort of internal, external conflicts, emotional emptiness, like longing, wishing you could do more, and then about the ending. I'm glad you said that around the death piece, because it would be real easy, and I suppose easy for the more lazy creative to look at as an ending or a full stop, when actually you can use it in the context a reformation, a transformation, a resurrection, going full on Christian here. But essentially, the way I looked at it was almost like letting go. I wonder what your takeaway is on that.
Yeah, I love that. Again, like when I was going through it, you would be surprised by, because they're just little lines in the book of Revelation. And there are tons of books and tons of perspectives on these four horsemen. And I guess that's what's so much fun about writing about them, is that you're given these four lines. And then really it's just like, take with that what you will, like see what happens with that. And so when I wrote Death, who in the trilogy is the leader of the four horsemen, I did not write him how you would imagine death be, right? Like doom and gloom and an ending. No, he's actually like the leader. He is the most hopeful. He is keeping the others up and continuing forward and progressing and kind of like encouraging them. He is, for all intents purposes, kind of like the cheerleader of the story. So I thought that was a pretty fascinating take on, like, you shouldn't look at death as just being the end. Like, you should look at it from, it's just another, like, chapter. Like he is, and what he's trying to do right in the story is prevent that chapter from ending. Like he's actually trying to prolong the chapter. He's trying to give life to it. So I like playing with like different twists on individuals, and so death was a ton of fun for me to kind of write about, because he had that duality of like, he's the good guy. He's trying to help people, but he is also death at the end of the day, and he can do what needs to be done if he needs to. So
Excellent. And here's quite a window into you, or a window into the soul. Like when you write, are you in control of the world, or does it take control of you? And has that changed over, three different books now?
when I started, I was in full creative control. Over time, as I developed as a writer, as an author, and I think more and more about it, and the story itself started to develop more, I had less control, but I was still very much in it. Like I still wrote it. I still had the plot lines. Where I lost some creative control, just to, again, to be honest, is in my characters. So the
Mm,
plot, I knew where the plot was going, but how I got there, sometimes the characters almost kind of had like a mind of their own. One in particular, um, and sometimes they would just kind of take over and tell the story a different way. And so it would be like that push and pull dynamic of like, I really want to tell it this way, and then a character, as I'm typing them, would just go in a completely different direction. And I don't know how else to explain it without sounding a little bit crazy, but that is really what it was. Like I would try to tell the story of a character and they would just kind of go in a different direction. And sometimes I would push back and say like, "No, I want to kind of keep it this way. Let's figure it out." And other times I would just kind of step back and take notes and see where it took me. At that point in time, nobody was reading it but me. It was just for myself, and so I could play around with things like that where I'm like, "All right, well, let's see where this journey takes us. Let's go down this path and see what happens." So the world itself, I had a pretty good idea of where I was going, but sometimes the characters went off script a little bit, and so I had to kind of see where they go.
interesting. And one thing that I've noticed, I've never been, to be honest, I've never been disciplined enough to write a book, and I don't know if I've got maybe the mental fortitude or the patience to get there. But what it sounds like there is almost like you reaching a flow state, and the character sort of growing legs of its own and then developing and then tapping into, I suppose, your unconscious as the person who's setting the narrative, which is probably not effortless, right? But it's frictionless, which is a very different thing. Can you speak to that flow state and the required level of discipline to get there?
So I love my flow states are very rare. So when I get them, I get very excited about them, but it takes a very particular moment for me to kind of get them, right? My life is a little chaotic. I have a full-time job. I'm a mom. I got 2 dogs. I got a husband. Everybody needs attention. I got family. I got friends that I got to do. I gotta take care of myself, so there's gotta be self-care. And so my writing really happened at nighttime, and I'm not a night owl. I like the mornings. So if I could write, I would choose the mornings, but usually everybody's up by then. And so my time to write was really in the nighttime, kind of like after dinner to maybe 10, 11 p.m., and so it gave me a couple of hours, but those hours were so important to me. So either I was deleting entire chapters because I had read the night before and I was like, "No, I don't wanna go this way," or I hit that flow state of, "Okay, you know, ear pods in, let's buckle down, let's just go. Let's type, let's see what happens, and then you can reread it after. So it's almost like I'm seeing it play out in my head first so that I have the ability to type it. And I do think that comes from like my screenwriting background. Um, see the scene, figure out where everybody is planted, where everybody is. Don't forget anybody. Make sure everybody's doing something. Type it out, and then I could always go back and like edit it for like, you know, details or if I wanted to kind of like add certain things to a scene. I'm very intentional with my writing. Um, and so I got plot holes. I'll pass out if somebody finds a plot hole in my trilogy. Like I'm really, really intentional with how I wrote it. I try to explain everything. I try to make sense of everything, at least in a fantastical world type of way. Um, and so that flow state is very, very important for me. But I will say that the discipline aspect of it grew because when I started this journey, I had no discipline. I really didn't like to just put it plainly. I decided one day that I was like, let me just sit down and kind of commit and see what happens if I start writing this story. But no pressure. Like there was nothing. I was very kind to myself. Like I wasn't like there was no anxiety about it. I wasn't meeting a deadline. I wasn't trying to feed it to somebody else. Like this was strictly for me. And so once I stood in that mindset, everything else kind of grew naturally. And then the discipline started forming of like, okay, every night, let's see if I could get a few words on a page and see what happens. So,
Yeah. There's a certain amount of humility there coming across from you, but I'm really glad that you kind of spelled out that that's been something that's in development. It's it's reps, right? You build reps into it like the gym, and then from there, I suppose there's more chance of hitting that natural flow state the more time you put the reps in. And I think the big one as well, understanding the dynamics around you and where the ideal space is and how do you create the right space. And yeah, that comes with time, skill, and developing knowledge, right?
exactly. Exactly. Well said. That's exactly what it is.
You mentioned fantastical, and that's a good segue. I'm going to pick up on that. Your trilogy, it lives in a fantasy world, but from what I can gather and what you've said today, there's some really authentic emotions that underpin everything. Maybe even uncomfortably so. So, how do you bridge the gap between the imagined and the deeply human? What's the process?
So for me, just because and I speak from this point of view as not just a writer, but just a reader, right? Like, because when I read, I love reading about fantasy or even horror, like just anywhere to take me out of like the real. And so the imagined and fantasy is everything that we don't normally see or know of, right? So, like in my book, there's angels and there's demons and there's magic in physical form, right? Um, where the deeply human component comes from is everything else, right? But mostly in how my characters handle the fantastical situations that they're in. So, I wanted that portrayal to be very real when there's like crazy stuff happening around them. That's how I want to kind of like lure my readers in. Um, their reactions are the best portrayals of perhaps how you or I would handle a situation if we are faced with like fighting a demon, right? Like, what's the first thing that you think of when you're faced with like this monster in front of you? It's either run or fight. Most of the time, me included, I'm going to try to run. And so these characters do. They have like those very human emotions. And so the biggest thing with fantasy for me is grounding the fantastical in very real human emotion that shows in your character's actions and words. So, like, whereas we might never live in those worlds, we can still feel and understand what the characters are going through in them.
Like to invite one of your characters into this space. If you could bring one in right now, is there like a protagonist? Is there a character that maybe sits in the back that doesn't get a lot of light? But what's some of your favorites within your trilogy? Because I think that'd be an interesting exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my two main characters are Theo and Shade. They are basically the main characters of this story. We have the other horsemen, very big characters, but side characters. And then we have a couple of real surprises within the story. One in particular, and for those who have read it, know exactly who I'm about to say, but his name he goes by the name of Laz, and he was supposed to be a very very minor character in book one that did not stay minor. He actually grew. He was one of the characters that kind of took off and took creative control from me and was like, no, I'm gonna go into book two and book three and see what happens. I wanna kind of see where this journey goes. Um, and so he would be a character that I would probably like invite into this just because he's very complex. He turned it from something that was going to be so minor. He played a pretty decent role in the first book, but it was supposed to end. It was supposed to be over. And that just didn't work out the way that I had planned. And he became something that I believe is quite integral to the story, as is Theo and Shade, but there's components to them. So it's not so much the character themselves, but how they make the reader feel in certain situations they're put in. And so when Shade goes through some things, she's relatable. But maybe Laz going through other things, he can be relatable now and have like the spotlight on him. That's how I try to make every character count. Um, Ones that I thought I didn't give enough attention to, which was Wyatt and Penny, which were the horsemen of war and pestilence. They were these cute side characters and they were adorable and I love them, but they didn't get a lot of page time per se. And yet when I speak to people, sometimes their favorite characters are Wyatt and Penny. And it's so fascinating to me that with such little page time, these two little positive individuals kind of stole people's hearts. I thought that was really cool. That was a really cool um, way to look at it.
I love a villain. And my guess is there's probably some really dark characters in there. Would you like to bring one of them in from behind the virtual velvet curtain just so I can get a feel for the very darkest shadow aspects of what's going on for them?
Yes. So I love a really good villain too. And so I got a little villain happy in my book. I wanted to kind of explore all the different aspects of them, right? From gray to black to blue to whatever you want. And so we have like the anti heroes, which I guess you could kind of classify Laz as one of them. He kind of reluctantly helps the heroes, but he's not great. He's not like a good guy. He's just kind of there and he's on their side for now. And then you have a redeemable villain, right? Everybody loves like the morally gray villain nowadays. That's what you see in every fantasy book that I have read or have picked up in the last couple of years is like that villain that you can relate to. I love them too. I'm guilty as charged. And there is one in my book that maybe you won't love, but you understand where he's coming from. He's what I call almost like, I don't know if you watch superhero movies, but like the Thanos character,
Mm.
where it's like Thanos did a really bad thing and he shouldn't have done it, but you kind of understand deep down where he was coming from, right? This was an alien that was trying to save his own race, spoke many times about saving his own race. They didn't listen to him and they perished. And so he was just trying to go about and save who he could in a very, very messed up way. So you have villains like that, and then you have the Sauron type villains, right?
Right.
Pre the show. I will not talk about the show, but like the Sauron Lord of the Ring villain movie, like he just wants power and that's all he wants and that's all he cares about and that's it. He doesn't care who he hurts or who's in his way. He just wants what he wants. And I really have a lot of respect for those villains. And there is a villain like that in this story. Who I don't want to give too much away, but I think the way I have them portrayed is very unique, in a way that has everything's been done before, but it hasn't been seen a lot lately. And so I had a really good time writing that villain. So the morally gray one was great. The anti-hero is always fun because they're usually funny too. But that pure, I just want to kind of hurt you because you're in the way type of villain. I love exploring like that. The consequences of getting in front of that type of villain. I think that's just it's really cool to me. I miss those villains though.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Thanos. There's a sort of twisted logic there, but I suppose internally pretty consistent. And then if I think about other sort of moral greys, let's call them,
Yes.
you've got like sort of Walter White's another one.
Yes.
Um,
That's a
from
great one.
Breaking Bad, probably the Joker. There's another one as well. Um, so yeah, probably not trying to win per se, but I suppose trying to prove a point.
Yes.
So yeah, I do like the morally grey ones as well, but then I like the out and out psychopath, get in my way and I will crush you just for
That's
the
it.
sake of it as well. Because what's really interesting for me is that anything that's in film, anything that's in your book, anything that we see represented in visual arts is really a reflection of ourselves and what we're capable of, which is
Yes.
for me the juicy bit, right?
I love it. I love exploring that. I try not to go too deep into it just because you could fall down a rabbit hole and that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down. But yes, absolutely. Like I really do love scratching the surface of what makes people people and what makes them tick and what makes them kind of like snap. It's very interesting.
Um, Thinking about you as a writer, and from what you've told me about the couple of characters that you brought into the room already, there seems to be like a real vulnerability within that as well. I kind of almost feels birthed in lived experience, and yeah. So where does that come from for you, and does it ever cost you something to write that honestly?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely costs me. And thank you. That's an amazing thing to say to somebody, like to a writer like me, like that you like feel like that raw vulnerability in different types of characters. I think that it comes honestly from paying attention. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm not an extrovert. I'm sure you could probably tell. But I do pay attention and I watch people and I listen, I feel their emotions and those quiet moments that most of us don't say out loud. I try to analyze it very heavily. I've always been drawn to like those in between spaces, if you will, just because again, usually pretty quiet, unless I know you. Like everybody says, I'm a quiet person around my friends and family. Sure, I like to talk and I'm very comfortable with them, but in general, I am a quiet person. And so what I try to identify is like those things that we feel, but we don't necessarily share. And so writing those moments into my characters is a way of making them feel real in a sense. So yeah, it does cost something sometimes. Those scenes that hit a little too close or emotions that linger a little longer than I would like them to. But I do think that that also makes the story worth telling, if that makes sense. Like, if it feels real to me, there's a chance it's going to feel real to someone else too. And so that's why I kind of keep moving forward. And, if it gets too heavy, I might just close the laptop a little bit, maybe go for like a walk or do something completely different, like play a video game with my son or something light where I don't have to think about it for too long, rather than just kind of like sit with it. Because sometimes, even if you sit with it in the scene, it's not going to come out the way that you want to because your headspace just isn't there. You kind of got to just disconnect from it a little bit, which has proven it's easier said than done. Like, it's proven pretty difficult.
Sure.
Like, it's like, I know I'm saying big stuff, but, like, it's tough. It's really hard. Like, sometimes you just kinda wanna sit with the scene and you wanna get it done. You wanna, like, kinda get through it so that you don't have to really go through it anymore, but it's best to come at it with a clear head if you can.
Yeah, and I think other authors that I've spoken to, it's one of the most difficult things where, okay, there's an emotional intensity to it, but then you still need to have a level of objectivity in terms of your editing process as well. And like you said, knowing when to put things down and maybe think to yourself, well, my rational brain's not going to serve me well here because I'm emotionally burnt out. And
Yeah.
but again, that speaks to your earlier point around understanding your environment and your developing writing skills. In fantasy, so you mentioned Lord of the Rings, there. That's probably my first entry into that world is when I was like about 10. I think I started with The Hobbit first, as you do, right? I think I was about maybe 9 or 10 starting there. And I always got the feeling that through the filter of Bilbo Baggins, he was always right on the edge of absurdity, but always on the edge of falling off into the side into a fiery chasm. And fantasy often raises the stakes to life or death, but I suppose emotional stakes are harder to fake. What for you makes something feel truly high stakes to you as the writer?
Yeah, absolutely. And just side note, I love Bilbo Baggins. It might be a controversial statement, but I liked him a little bit better than I liked Frodo Baggins. I respect Frodo. I love Frodo, but Bilbo was he was my guy. Okay, so life or yes. So in my experience, readers I speak from me being a reader as well. They don't actually fear like death on a page. Like they've encountered, unfortunately, death before, or if they haven't, great, but they've seen it on TV, they've seen death in some kind. And so the actual death is not what affects them. It's what emotions the death brings up, right? So like the fear of loss, the regret, and the moment a character realizes, listen, they can't go back to who they were before. Um, that's what I strive to do with this trilogy. I show that through, consequences that stick, right? Or there's no clean outcomes, or there's love with consequences, or identity is on the line, right? Things that make the reader feel something rather than just saying, like, oh, this person, died. Like everything else in fantasy, gods, demons, angels, they're all amplifiers. It doesn't matter if they're not being written alongside something deeply human, right? Like there's not going to be any cost to it. And so what I try to find throughout this trilogy is how can I evoke emotions within the readers that's not just like, oh, this is, life or death. But there not be any raised stakes, but nobody sacrifices anything. Um, I'm a big believer in, you know, earning a win or earning, something like an outcome. Like if I'm talking about a big battle that's going to take place for an entire book and I don't commit to that battle, I'm failing the reader. Like I have to deliver on something because I've been talking about it, I've been setting it up the whole time. Give them that emotion, give them that like release of okay, they've been talking about this crazy battle. I've been reading, 200 pages and there's no battle. Like what's happening? And then you commit to that battle. Or if somebody is fighting for something, one of the horsemen is fighting somebody, and you could tell that there's like a real history there. You make that win or that loss earned because of the context, because of the buildup. So that's how I feel like you kind of come at it from high stakes. It's not really life or death. It's more what do you feel when the stakes are life or death? Like, what does that evoke in your reader? How can you pull that from them in a way that will resonate with them the best way?
Even though I'm not with you, but what you've described, your characters, your world, the battles, the kind of premise, the four horsemen, the sort of the sort of background story, the history of that as well. And then I'm thinking about your early development in terms of screenplay writing. Um, is there any potential to one day see these books? Maybe not on a big screen, but have you maybe thought about it sort of visually as well?
I would love that. I mean, I think anybody would love to see their creative, piece be brought to life any way that it could. So for me, it was the books. Could one day it be like TV, movies down the line? Sure, I wouldn't step in the way of that. I think it in my head, I've already seen the TV show. I've already seen the movie because it's played out. And I will say that having that vision has pros and cons, right? Like having that screenplay background has pros and cons when writing a book because it's so different. And in the first book, and I'm not ashamed to say it, like it was my first book. I'm super proud of it. But like you can see where like some of the screenplay JF sneaks into the narrative. And I'm like, maybe I could have shown something better there and not just like told the people what was happening. But in screenplays, you tell, like you have to give direction. You have to tell the people where they are. And so it got a little bit murky with my screenplayer background in the first book. I get better throughout the second and the third. It was a work in progress for me, but yeah, like I can see it. If I can't see it in my head, I'm not going to be able to get it out on paper. It's not going to come across the way I want it to. So right before every single scene, whether it be a quiet scene or a really big battle, which is very intense for someone like me because there's a lot of stuff happening in battle and that's a lot of things to remember. But I have to see it first. Like I have to sit back and I have to try to play it out in my head. And then I'm like, okay, so Wyatt's over here. He's fighting this person, and then Theo's over here, and he's dealing with like these individuals. Like, make sure everybody has a part to play, and that's kind of how I get it on paper. Is I gotta see it in my brain first.
I've got two trains of thought going through my murky mind at the minute. And one is around just thinking about the hypothetical. If the visual representation of your books was here tomorrow, what would be the rating for it? Would it be an 18, a 15? Would it be parental guidance? Where would it sit, do you think?
It would definitely sit probably at 18 and over. There's some pretty gnarly stuff that happens in the books that I would say you have to have at least a semi-developed brain. Like you have to have that 18 years and older attitude to it. I wouldn't say anybody younger, not that it would stop anyone over here. They would probably find a way to see it anyway, but they do touch on some pretty dark themes occasionally that I wouldn't recommend for anyone younger than.
And I'm thinking about my other train of thought, disclosure, is around the violence piece in storytelling. And sometimes it can feel meaningful, right? It's like it's a means to another part of the story or part of character development or influencing heavily a plot line or a pathway towards something. Whereas sometimes I see things that are just pretty much overwhelming. So, how do you approach those moments so that they carry that narrative weight rather than just, violence for violence sake?
Yeah, I love that question because I have a really strong opinion on it, only because as a reader, I've seen it done so many different ways. And when I went to write, I knew what I wanted to do and I knew what I definitely didn't want to do. And I didn't want to be gratuitous with the violence. I wanted to do it in a way where it still resonated with the reader and you're like, "Oh my god, like this person is hurt." But I really focused more on the emotions, not the injuries. So, like, they would get hurt, and I wouldn't really go too much into detail of, like, the wound because I'm like, you could make that up in your head anyway. But the way that the character is reacting to the wound is what's so harrowing about it. That's what I really wanted to kind of, like, solidify with them is, like, you don't have to see the stab wound, right, or the gunshot wound, but the way the character's reacting is telling you how bad it is or is telling you how gruesome it is or if you talk about their hands and there's a lot of red on their hands, like you just describe it that way and you're like, okay, this is a way of telling it where you're not gonna like turn somebody off. Because I there's been some scenes in books that I've read where I'm like why? Why would I appreciate it and I think that the author wanted to evoke a sense of like real dread and horror and they succeeded. They did. It's just not my cup of tea in terms of how I would have done it. I like to show less and give the emotions more of a front row seat to that to show how bad it is. And it happens a couple of times in the trilogies where characters get hurt and if it's a flesh wound, they react accordingly. And if it's bad, then you'll see like how they react. The difference is pretty jarring. And I will say just it goes for the opposite too, right? So like love. Um, I think that this is a fantasy romance, right? So we have Theo, we have Shade, but romance is not gratuitous. It just fits where the narrative is in the quiet moments when they get to breathe. When there's not like it's not in like in the middle of battle where everything kind of pauses and they're just like, I see you across the battlefield. That's not me. That's not how I'm gonna write. I do find it very entertaining when other people do that. I think it's hilarious and I love it. Not that type of those are not my type of books. It has to matter. It has to be intentional both ways.
Yeah, and you touched upon love. Like you said, there's a real sort of romantic flavor running through the trilogy as well. But like you said, not gratuitous. Do you see that as a refuge for your characters, or just another way to tap into their universality, in terms of buy-in towards them?
I will say both. But it's gonna be more of a challenge than a refuge at the end of the day. So it'll start as a refuge, right? So romance usually starts as a refuge. It's the one place where my characters can, like I said, just breathe for a second, right? Where the chaos just kind of quiets and it's enough for them to just kind of feel seen and chosen and understood. You get almost like a break. It's like a break from the chaos. Um, the world is constantly asking them to fight, to sacrifice, to become something more than human, right? And so love is supposed to remind them that there's still someone underneath it all. And that's what I'm trying to convey. But it never stays easy, right? So the second that Theo begins to care about Shade, love kind of turns into leverage, right? It kind of turns into a vulnerability that he can't afford. It raises the stakes in a way that nothing else will for him. So now it's not just their survival on the line, it's the risk of losing like that one person that makes it all worth it, right? That makes the whole journey worth it. And even worse, loving someone could mean choosing them over the greater responsibility or letting them go to protect them or becoming someone that they might not recognize anymore. We've seen it done over done in so many different it doesn't even it transcends fantasy. We've seen it done in all different types of genres. But that's where it shifts from like refuge to challenge. And I like writing romance that forces characters to confront who they are versus like who they need to be, right? It exposes like their fears and their selfishness and their capacity to like sacrifice, sometimes to like to their limits almost. So yeah, so love gives them a place to breathe.
Pause. Take a breath. Notice where your thoughts have wandered and maybe where you've tried to chase them with a solution. I want to tell you about something today unusual, something not quite chemical, not quite spiritual, and definitely not FDA approved. Meet the Mindfold Capsule. The Mindfold Capsule doesn't claim to fix your mental health. That would be absurd. Instead, it folds it slightly, gently, in a way you didn't know you needed. Side effects may include sudden clarity about things you didn't need clarity on, mild philosophical confusion, temporary urges to reconsider your relationship with reality. It doesn't replace therapy, it doesn't replace medication, it doesn't replace coping mechanisms. But in a moment when drugs promise a shortcut or the world offers a simple product, the Mindful Capsule reminds you that complexity is okay. To take it, you do nothing, or everything. Perhaps the capsule activates when you remember to breathe. Perhaps it waits until you stop trying, and then a subtle shift. Not a fix, not an answer, just a fold. The mindful capsule, because sometimes wellness isn't about solving, it's about noticing the spaces in between what you said, what you felt, what you forgot. Too light, too dark. Chasing the surreal since the 80s. I've got a bit of curveball. I've got something up my sleeve here, and it's not just my forearm. I've got a little section called Three Pillars. And to help our listeners get to know you a little bit, the three pillars are based on books, on movies, or in Scotland we say film, even though nobody knows what a film is. A movie. The last bit is about music. And I'll start off with books. So, what's a book that's never really left you, the kind that changed how you see the world or yourself?
I reread every year. I don't reread books, just for context. Like I don't reread books. But every year there's one book, and it's The Odyssey by Homer.
Mm.
I I love that book so much. I think that's like the quintessential, you know, hero's journey type book where it lays out a map on how to write a good narrative. I love it. It's probably my top 5, maybe even top 3 books of all time. Um, my book is beaten and it's hanging on by a thread, and it's like the pages are falling down, and I probably need a new one. But I love it, and I love reading about other people's take on it. Like, because
Mm.
remember, like, with the Odyssey, it was obviously written, like, eons and eons ago, but, um there's so many different interpretations of what he goes through and like his inner journey versus his external journey, and it's just I took a lot of references and I paid a lot of homage for to the Odyssey in this trilogy.
Would that be a book that you'd gift? If you could give somebody a book gift tomorrow, it would be that one?
It would be. It definitely would be. I've done it before. I don't know how much they appreciated my beautiful gift, but, but I have done it before where it's like almost like if you're going to read any book, it doesn't have to be the next one, but it should be on your list to definitely be consumed. I love that book so much.
We've had all sorts on here, but Homer's The Odyssey will be a hot take in amongst a burgeoning list of classics. Now, movies. Is there a film that you return to or one that hit you in a way that you didn't expect? Something that felt real or close or something that you can think of that you would hand over for somebody to watch?
Can it be a TV show?
Yeah, of course.
One that stays with me, and I'm gonna be completely honest here, 'cause I don't know if I could watch it again.
Mm.
But when I did watch it, I just wow. Um, The Leftovers. It was a TV show called The Leftovers, and it was basically about on October 14th, which is my birthday, um, half more than half of the population just disappears, and 2% of the world is left. And it's about those 2%. We follow these characters dealing with the outcome of what happened, like how they deal with it, and they all deal with it in many different ways. And it's like an essay on grief and how different people handle this like catastrophic event that has happened. And some people go crazy and some people go numb, and how you kind of try to find your way back to yourself. It was it is one of the best TV shows that I have ever watched. It's probably my number 1. I'd recommend it to anybody. However, I'm not entirely sure I could watch it again, like, all the way through. I remember exhibiting, very intense emotions when I watched it, more than I'm used to and more than I was comfortable with. And so, though it left me with this really, really beautiful feeling of, like, "Okay, I've never seen something like this before, and I love it. I really, really do. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I could ever put it back on." um, again, but it would be the first one I recommend to anybody.
I've just added that. I just minimized the screen there, added that on things for me to watch pretty soon.
Yes.
Um,
I don't even know how to describe it better than how I did, which is it's my first recommendation, and I just can't. I don't even know what that means, but like I can't. I don't know if I could watch it again. So it
I'll
was
maybe
good.
share with you an email long after the podcast is over, and I'll give you my my takeaway. Now, this is my favorite bit, to be honest, is around music. What did you listen to when you're growing up, or what do you need to listen to through sad times or happy times? Is there a song or artist that connects you back to yourself? Give me JF Monroe's musical taste because I'm super interested.
I love it. I grew up in the 90s, and so I grew up with Britney and Christina and Backstreet Boys and all of the boy bands. I was the typical kid, so I loved it all. Avril Lavigne when I was sad, Simple Plan. My taste in music has only gotten wilder as I grew up, as I continue to grow. But yeah, those were the basics. That was my go-to. I did like alternative rock and punk rock. I got into that a lot. Um, like Godsmack and System of the Down and things like that.
Yeah.
When I was angry and feeling very like teenage angry, and I would sit in my room and mope all the time. But,
Remember
as I
that?
grew yeah, but, like, it was just oh god, I think back on my teenage years and I'm like, "What were you doing? Why would you do this?" But I can laugh about it now, which is good. But, as I continued, to grow and I started to write and music, I'm sure you're very much aware, like, helps you when you're writing, especially when you see certain scenes in your head, and so I would pick a lot of, like, what we call almost like trailer music, but really it's like classic music, like classical music. A lot of Hans Zimmer because who doesn't love Hans Zimmer? He's
Of
amazing.
course.
And just like some random songs that just have to hit. Sometimes it just hits different. So like Don't Fear the Reaper was a huge one when
Mm.
I was writing this trilogy. I listened to it in many different forms. So Blue Oyster Cult was always the original, but Baltic House Orchestra kills their version of Don't Fear the Reaper, and I was like, "Oh gosh, I love this too." Um, and then sometimes I'll write a scene where they're just letting loose for a little while, and so it's like a fun song, like you might throw in a little Shaboozey there or something like that, where it's just like, "What's going on here? Why? Why is Shaboozey playing?" And I'm like, "That's what I'm feeling right now." Um, so my music taste is very sporadic, but it's usually just about like what hits when, like the timing of it. And if the timing is right, I really like it could be either way with me. I love everything.
Yes, for me, music is completely irrational. There's no inner critic. I can be ABBA dancing queen 1 minute. I can be
Yeah.
hard house. I can be classic. I can go into the jazz world.
Yep.
I literally have no snobbery
Yeah.
um, anymore. Maybe I'm just getting old. So I'm moving towards the end of our time together, and I will end with like a beautiful sorbet dessert question, but there's one thing that I've been really curious as you've been speaking, and that's the notion of fear in human beings and fear in your characters and fear, including fear itself, as a plot device and a fear in storytelling. And how do you deal with that aspect? Because in a certain sense, fear is going to create tension even when nothing is physically happening. It's perfect for psychological stakes. How much do you work within the context of fear and the concept of fear, since it's such a massive driver for human beings generally?
I mean, it's huge. I play on fear in this trilogy. That's what keeps the journey going. In this particular in these books is fear, and it's different types of fear, right? Like that's what's so much fun to play with. Not obviously for my poor characters, but for me. You have that internal fear of you have to remember they're dealing with these entities. The four horsemen are within these human vessels, but they're still themselves, but they're dealing with these outside entities that are kind of talking to them. And so identity gets pushed into that, like the fear of who am I? Right? At the end of the day, or who am I going to turn into be at the end of this journey? Am I going to make it to this journey? So it's like the fear of death in a way, right? Like what happens if I lose people along the way? I found this, these other horsemen are my family in a sense. And so what happens if I lose them? Like what's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to me? And so fear is all over this trilogy, but balance it would be like my tip, just like I always make sure that if I'm not gonna overwhelm you with fear, I'm gonna give you enough fear where you're like, and then I'm gonna give you some light. I'm gonna give you some hope. Because if you read a story and it's just like you just get slammed with like they're losing, there's a lot of fear, there's you almost get like that existential crisis of like, why am I reading this book? Like, why would I pick this up? There has to be that light. There has to be that hope. And so as I love exploring fear, but I also need to make sure that it balances out with something light at the end, like or some type of hope, or else your characters are just being tortured for no reason whatsoever, and that's not what I want to do with them. So
No, and I think that if without casting our net too far or out wide, there's enough mechanisms of fear that go on in our external worlds. Switch on your TV or switch on your algorithm, and you'll get enough fear there. Thank you very much. And I suppose it's up to us to try and be a little bit directional, whilst acknowledging fear is there, and it's something we should always be mindful of.
agreed. I absolutely agree with that. And what I wanted this trilogy to show was, these ordinary individuals can do really quite extraordinary things given the circumstances that they're under. And so that was like a really big push for me, like to try to get that out there in the narrative of like, yeah, there's fear and they're going through it and there's a lot going on, but they're doing okay. They're holding their own and there is hope and light at the end of the tunnel. So
And there is, right? There is light at the end of the tunnel for all of us. You know.
agreed.
And the dessert question is, if there's one thing that you could reach out to a prospective reader of your book or a listener of the podcast or one of your existing fans, if there's one message that you could kind of leave behind for them, what would that be?
I A lot of my readers are trying to break into writing themselves, and like become authors. And they have like that doubt within them. Like they're always like, well, where do I start? Should I do it? Like, am I good enough? And I'm going to be completely honest. I'm completely honest with them, and I'll be completely honest here. Like that voice of doubt is going to follow you for the rest of your life. Like it never fully goes away. It's not just in the creative space, it's going to be in everything you do. I'm a mom. I have doubt all the time if I'm doing a good job with my kid. Like, um, it just gets quieter, the more that you keep going. That's the message that I would try to convey to them is just as long as you keep going and keep moving, that voice, you're going to leave it behind. Like it's going to get a lot quieter and it's not going to have that much effect on you. Like when it shows up, I always try to remind myself that I didn't imagine the story for no reason, right? Like eh, progress over perfection. Growth only happens in motion. Like you've heard the terms before, right? Don't wait until you're ready because nobody is ever ready. Like, let's wait to have a baby. We financially ready. No, let's not how we should be deciding things. Um and another thing I try to portray to try to, convince them of is, like, that fear that they're feeling usually means that what they're focused on matters, right? Like,
Mm.
it matters. So if they're standing at the edge and they're unsure of where to begin, they don't necessarily need confidence. I'd say that they just need permission. I think they're waiting for like somebody to give them permission. And sometimes you got to just give yourself permission, right? You're allowed to give yourself that. You start with one scene, you start with one line, you start with one moment, you start with one line that you misinterpret, and a whole entire trilogy comes out of it. Because the only difference between like dreaming about writing and actually doing it is starting before you feel ready. Like just do it, right? Like the Nike logo, just do it. It's just it's a very powerful thing for me. But I do wanna be clear, like, I know of I've seen some podcasts before where they're like, "Oh, if you do this, creative doubt just kinda goes away," and no, it doesn't. Like, doubt itself is just never gonna go away, it's always gonna hit you, and you're always gonna have to find ways to deal with it, but that's how I try to deal with it, and give yourself some grace. Be kind to yourself because we're all going through it, so it's nothing special on your end, like, it's not just a you thing, it's an us thing, um, and you'll get through it.
What a beautiful message. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, get a hold of your books, and want to engage with you on social media, how do people get in touch and how do we get a hold of that trilogy, please?
Absolutely. So you can find me, you can find the trilogy on Amazon and you can find it on Kindle Unlimited. It's all there. As soon as you type on Amazon, it gives you all different formats that that book comes into, but it is on Kindle Unlimited on free. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok. It's at jf.monroe. Very simple. And I will pop up. If you like, pictures, Instagram is your way to go. TikTok, if you like to hear me chat once in a while, which could be grating a little bit, I'm not going to lie. You can always come talk to me on TikTok. I do have a website. It is jfmonroebookshelves.com. So you can drop by there. It's a pretty cool website. I'm not going to lie. I had some help with it and they did a really amazing job. So if you want to check that out, that's perfectly fine. jfmonroebookshelf.com. And that's it. Somebody's been trying to convince me to get on Twitter. I'm thinking about it. I'm a little overwhelmed with Instagram and TikTok, to be honest. So I'm going to take my time, but maybe Twitter will be coming up next. Who knows?
I've just got a little reflection piece before we go today, and that is every creative journey has doubt in it. When that voice creeps in, what do you remind yourself of? Like you say, is keep doing it, keep
Yes.
working that skill. And there's something about stories like yours that don't end when the conversation does. It lingers in the quiet moments and the questions you didn't expect to be asking yourself. And maybe that's the point, because somewhere between the light and the dark, we're going to find the parts of ourselves we've been trying to understand all along. A huge thank you today for stepping into the space with us, with honesty, with depth, and without looking away. This has been Too Light, Too Dark. Until next time, stay gold, stay curious, and stay beautiful. Namaste. Thank you so much.